Just shy of a year ago, I became the proud owner of an Option O Lagom P64. After the immense disappointment that was the Weber key, going back and forth in my own head and even crowdsourcing some options from fellow copy lovers with even the likes of James Hoffman chiming in, I finally landed on the Lagom P64 for a few reasons. I was coming off of years of niche zero ownership, so I was searching for a similar workflow but something different in the cup. I was also aiming for something that was essentially an endgame grinder. It was my second major grinder purchase, and at the time, I also considered it my last. But now, after a year of ownership, daily use, and a near constant carousel of grinders on my bar since then, I think it's finally time I give y'all an update on life with the P64. So in this video, I'll go over where it excels, where it falls short, and its new accessories, and if it truly still stands alone as the last grinder I'll ever buy. But first, a quick word from this video's sponsor, STANDART Magazine. Nothing goes together quite like a cup of coffee and some quality reading, and STANDART Magazine fits into that pocket of happiness perfectly. This humble, independently published, coffee-focused magazine is always chock full of informative articles, in-depth profiles, and stunning visuals. On top of the treats for your eyes, each issue also comes with a tasty coffee from some of the world's best roasters, which takes the whole experience full circle, from your brain buds to your taste buds. So head on over to standartmag.com/Sprometheus, use the link in the description, or use code Sprometheus at checkout to snag $5 off your very own subscription of coffee and culture, shipped direct to your door nearly anywhere in the world. Now that's what I call a win-win-win. I'll be the first to admit that the P64's look isn't for everyone, and honestly it wasn't really even for me when I first saw it in pictures. But with it on my bar, its presence is actually pretty striking, even after a year. But I don't think there's a whole lot of room to debate how solid and well made the body and chassis are. Even after a year of nearly daily use, opening and periodically cleaning, I haven't seen any evidence of premature aging or wear. Not one sharp corner, edge, or awkward seam. Even the threads on the upper portion of the grinder still slip into place effortlessly. The stepless grind adjustments are also just as buttery as they were on day one. And the exterior forks are solid and stable, and considering the consistent metal-on-metal contact, they show little to no wear and tear, and this includes the original dosing cup and funnel. On the inside, the motor itself has been very reliable when it comes to torque and overall power, ripping through beans light and dark, using cold or hot starts without issue, and it does so within a very wide range of speeds, from 200 to 1400 RPM. Which is now something we've seen on many occasions isn't always guaranteed when it comes to grinders with speed control. Now for those already familiar with the P64, this isn't news, but it does come with a wide variety of burr options, and I opted for the SSP multi-purpose. These are unimodal, meaning all of the blade's peaks are at the same height. The benefits of this style of burr geometry is there are minimal fines leading to maximum clarity. And as I mentioned in my original review, this has been my experience and still is. Using these burrs, I've been able to produce some of the cleanest and most unique cups of coffee I've had in my career. But because this video is more so focused on the grinder and its operation and use over time, I don't want to talk too much about the burrs, but if you want a more in-depth detailed explanation on how they perform and what they do in the cup, you should check out my original review where I go more in detail on that. But the TLDW is, these burrs lean heavily on clarity and brightness, and pull back on texture and balance. Of course, as you maybe would expect, if you use something long enough, you'll run into some flaws, whether it be in design, usability, workflow, or performance, and when it comes to the P64, it's no exception. First up, personally, I'm a big fan of utilizing RDT, and it's definitely encouraged by Option O. They even include a very nice tinted glass spray bottle, but I found that small bits of moisture can cause the beans to get caught and sit on the internal popcorning lid. And of course, there may be a better way to do this, but my 8 brain tells me to use my fingers to dig in and push them off. So it sort of goes without saying I'd love to see on a future update a more curved cover to encourage the beans to keep moving. Next up, the RPM dial. As you can see, it shows an adjustment of 1 through 9, but the knob itself is stepless, and the grinder technically has 13 settings, so choosing an RPM accurately is more or less a guessing game. Also, one of the main selling points for me on this grinder was its permanent alignment, and that's actually remained pretty stable over time, but I have had some odd float when it comes to the grinder's 0 point. From the factory, they mark it with this sticker, and originally it was just a few notches before 5, but somehow, over the last year, It's moved coarser, and is now a few notches past it. Of course, this isn't a massive deal and it hasn't really affected the alignment or the performance of the grinder, but it just is sort of an odd thing that's happening, because you'd expect as the burrs wear, that point would move finer, not coarser. And lastly, the big one, price and availability. In the US, you're looking at a starting price of $15.85 before shipping and associated costs, and it's rare you'll find them available to buy right now, usually only as a pre-order. Now, I'm not saying that the P64 isn't worth the price, but what I am saying is this can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Yeah, the rarity and the expense can make it a very highly sought-after piece of coffee kit, but it can push people into the arms of more available, less expensive options with similar features, like the new DF64V and the Sculptor 064S. Even though the P64 has been out for some time now, Optino is fairly well known for making pretty frequent changes and adjustments. Now, this can both be good and bad, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But within the last year or so, they dropped some new burrs and an updated dosing cup. Now, there's really nothing wrong with the original dosing cup, and it performs all the functions you'd expect from it. But it really didn't work all that well as a vehicle for espresso, especially if you prefer a dosing cup workflow over grinding directly into the portafilter. So they developed and put out the new Versa dosing cup, which has a familiar but divisive blind shaker workflow. Personally, that workflow isn't for me. I didn't like it on the Weber, and I don't like it on the P64. But I will say, it does make a nice transition into a pour over without getting grinds stuck to the filter walls. But in the end, workflow or preferences aside, much like any other Optino accessory, it's a very sturdy, well-made piece. And also, they've developed a second in-house set of burrs that they call the Mizen. Now, these have a very similar geometry to the very popular Lab Suite burrs. And like Lab Suites, they do create a similar cut profile, leaning heavily on texture and balance, but producing a somewhat cleaner cup across both fine and coarse brewing methods. But these new accessories aren't without their issues. As I mentioned earlier, Optino likes to frequently make changes and adjustments to their grinders, and this means fitment can range from being just a minor annoyance to a complete pain in the ass. The minor annoyance being the dosing cup, which doesn't quite fit flush and bumps up against the body of the grinder. It doesn't affect the overall usability, but it's not ideal. The burrs, on the other hand, can be a bit more of a time-consuming experience, because at some point during the P64's lifespan, Optino decided to change the height of the burr carriers. Originally, when I tried to install the Mizen set, I was very confused, because it sounded like the burrs were touching at finer settings, but when I took it apart, I found no evidence. Then I realized that it wasn't the burrs that were touching, it was the carriers. So it took me about 60 shims, 20 on 3 different points beneath the burrs, to lift them up above the outer posts on the carriers so the burrs could get close enough to grind for espresso. Now, I know I'm not the only one who's experienced this issue, so either there's not a whole lot of older P64 models trying to install these burrs, or there's just not enough of this issue going around for them to feel it's important to put it on their product page. So here we are. We're 12 months into the ownership of a Lagom P64, and admittedly it hasn't been flawless. But as I sat down to plan this video and put together my ideas for each section, I really thought I wouldn't have enough to say. I honestly sort of feel like I just buried in a mind hole all these annoyances and issues I've had with the grinder over the past year, and they've just sort of become how I use and work on the grinder. Essentially, I've just adapted. But considering I have a closet full of grinders and a consistent turnover of loaners that come through to review, it always just feels really good to come back to the P64. The tactile feel, the workflow, the consistency, all together creates an experience and connection that I've only ever had with the original niche. Now, I can't really explain why, but it just feels right. So today, here in front of you and my cat as witnesses, the Lagom P64 is still officially the last grinder I'll ever buy. Hopefully. And with all of that said, I think it's time I wrap this one up and pass the conversation on to you. What are your thoughts on the P64? If you're a current owner, how has your experience measured up to mine? And if you're looking to pick one up, what draws you to it? Drop your answers to those questions and any others you may have in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see y'all next week. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications of new videos posted every Friday. Check out my Instagram at Sprometheus for content throughout the week, my blog at Sprometheus.com, and as always, stay caffeinated. Ponyboy.